For all of Beckett's internationalism, then, his abandonment of Ireland and his abandonment of place, how can we read Waiting for Godot as an Irish text? Well, we can do so by looking at the text treatment of landscape, class, language, and colonialism. These are the four categories under which it is helpful to examine the text. The stage directions for Waiting for Godot, the setting up of the play, are very, very sparse. We're really only told three things about the setting of this play: a country road, a tree, evening. Beckett doesn't give us any other indication or information about where this is. There's a lot of interpretation to be done here. First of all, we could consider this as being indicative of the world being bombed out of existence after the Second World War. But we can also indicate that this may be a submerged Ireland, a country road, a tree, evening. Which country, it doesn't necessarily say. But critics have noted for a long time that the sparsity of landscape is indicative of an Irish countryside, particularly the west of Ireland and Connemara. So it's simultaneously France and Ireland in this post-place world. It could really be anywhere, but we can see it as a vision of Ireland. This is especially relevant because of Connacht's historical significance. During Cromwell's invasion of Ireland, people were told to go to hell or to Connacht. The only reason this happened was because the invaders felt that the land in Connacht wasn't sufficiently farmable, so they gave the west of Ireland to Irish Catholics. One of the reasons they did so was because there was the perception of Connemara that there is not wood enough to hang a man, not enough water to drown him, and not enough ground to bury him. It seems then that the nether space of Waiting for Godot, which is open to a huge amount of interpretation, is analogous to the landscape in Waiting for Godot. Because similarly, they can't even hang themselves when they try, because they suspect that the bough won't even sustain them. So it's the same barren, desolate landscape which has behind its history a huge amount of displacement and suffering. But then so does the Second World War. So it's important to remember that with Beckett, things do not have a particular subtext. These subtexts are very, very subjective, and Beckett's work can sustain or withhold really quite a lot of different interpretations. And this is the reason, or one of the benefits why they're minimalistic. One audience member, after a production of Waiting for Godot in the audience, asked whether these works were much like a Rorschach test, whether that it required the reader to complete them, the reader to attempt to fix the meaning upon the text. Beckett gives you a lot of latitude, a lot of room for interpretation with his minimalist approach. So in that sense, we can reasonably infer that one of the possibilities of many is that this is a play which has Connemara buried somewhere in its unconscious as a half-forgotten remnant of place now that the world has been bombed out of existence. These are half-forgotten memories, and it's quite possible that Connemara is being evoked within this. Particularly if you watch the play, you'll notice that there is a particular preoccupation with Irish speech patterns. Stephen Ray, in a recent interview with Tommy Tiernan, said that the Irish could do Beckett, and that Beckett himself knew that. This does indeed seem to be the case. He seems to have largely chosen actors who were Irish in origin. Some of the most prominent Beckett actors have been Irish. So, for example, Michael Gambon is one of the iconic Beckett actors. Jack McGowan, who you may recognise from The Exorcist, and the late Patrick Magee, who you may recognise from Clockwork Orange. So it seems there's something suited in Irish speech patterns to the original writing that Beckett did. In fact, Krapp's Last Tape was originally written with Patrick McGee in mind. It was originally called the McGee Monologues. So Beckett specifically had an Irish, Northern Irish actor in mind when writing the play. So as I'm sure you know by now, Waiting for Godot is an extremely word-heavy play. The characters do nothing but talk, mainly because this is just a way to fill in the time of Waiting for Godot. But for a play with so much talk, let's see if we can identify particular Irish elements of speech. The greeting, for example, of "there you are" is quite a noticeably Irish one. In Beckett it serves for existential validation, but it is nonetheless recognisable as a form to "there you are now," which is a common greeting, especially in the Midlands. There are many instances of particularly Hiberno-English vocabulary in the play as well. For example, the two tramps, Vladimir and Estragon, make fun of Pozzo when he suggests that he's lost his dudeen. Dudeen meaning, or een on the end of dudeen, meaning his pipe. In fact, the brand of the dudeen or pipe is Cap'n Peterson, which is a shop in Dublin, which is in fact still there. Other references are there too. Some people have suggested that the word Goddo is in fact a Dublin rendering of God, a nickname for God, Goddo. I'm not entirely convinced of this, as Beckett himself did say that if he had meant it to be God, he would have put God in the script. Another clue to the Irish quality of this play comes in the form of when Pozzo is eating chicken. He's approached by one of the tramps who says, "Excuse me, mister, you won't be wanting the bones." "You won't be wanting," in this case, comes from that's a Hiberno-English construction, because it comes from the original Irish, which uses the present progressive. So in this case, we're again seeing Ireland behind the text. We're seeing the speech patterns of Hiberno-English show up. And it's quite subtle, but especially comes shining quite clearly through with an Irish actor. For example, Johnny Murphy in his performance for the RTE production of Beckett on Film really brings the Irishness of this construction out quite sharply. Ireland as a country has been very preoccupied with issues of class for the last couple of 100 years. This is not least because of the penal laws, which reduced Irish people to being unable to climb the social ladder. There was always the sense in which Irish people were beholden to their landlord as well, and as a result they would have deferred to that landlord. Now, in one sense, this is applicable to every country with a power structure. But the power structure that's in place in Waiting for Godot is particularly couched in Irish. It's quite relatable to the Irish situation. So, for example, Pozzo, who comes in to the drama in the first act of the two acts, he immediately announces himself as being from a higher class, especially if you watch the RT Beckett on Film version. He speaks with a much clearer English accent. And the tramps defer to him quite readily, and in fact emulate him a little bit. So, for example, when he delivers one of his speeches, Dee says, "Tre bong, tre bong." The idea there is that Dee is trying to rise to the level of Pozzo, even in this post-place and post-identity universe. There still are the ineluctable remnants of what came before. Lucky, however, the character who doesn't really speak until one point, is someone who is in a particularly bad predicament. He is forced to carry Pozzo's bags, um, and he is tied around the neck by a rope. The dark joke there is that his name is Lucky because he's like a dog, like you would call Lucky, but he's also a character who is really in the worst circumstances. But when Didi and Gogo ask Pozzo, why do you not let? Why doesn't he put his bags down? Pozzo replies by saying, "He wants to impress me, so that I'll keep him." And there's a real preoccupation with class and even colonialism here. There's the idea that one must serve one's master, otherwise, that is the end. So even encoded within this is the penal laws is renting the idea of you will be cut off and evicted if you don't obey what you have to do. So and it's done in this really quite cruel image of having himself restrained by Pozzo. So in that respect, even after the world has really almost erased itself, some of the remnants still remain, some of the trappings of previous lives still remain. And one of them, for sure, in Beckett is the prevalence and issue of the relationship between class and power.